Hello, everyone. NaMu MyoHoRenGeKyo. Seeing things out of my glasses. Bomb cyclone. Yes, it is cold. Okay. Trying to stay warm here in the school. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your practice, your diligence. Don't forget, like and subscribe. Subscribing, very important. The growth of this channel. We are continuing with the life of Nichiren per Masuhara Anisaki. Yeah, Anisaki. Oh, I'm starting to remember his name. Amazing. We're in a very important transition here, where in the last video, the last part that we've read in this book, had to do with Nichiren being cast out of his original temple, which he went back to first deliver upon about a week in the forest of meditation on how he would proceed, having learned what he did at Mount Hiei with the core essential teaching of Shakyamuni on realizing Buddhahood, just as he'd done. And as we know, in his day, Nichiren observed that all of these other schools and sects and groups just had gone off the rails. They weren't following Shakyamuni's teachings at all. I mean, they were using his teachings for the rhetoric, for the way of talking about Buddhism, but they were highly motivated with their adaptations and their outright falsehoods to gain political power. In those days, equates, well, in these days as well, equates to wealth. Yeah? So it was all based on ego. The complete opposite of what Buddhism's stated mission is. And it drove Nichiren nuts. You can't. No wonder our country's in such peril and so much crap is going on and people are suffering. We're promoting Buddhism, and we're sinking deeper into the very things Buddhism is telling us we should be escaping. I mean, right? My brain is melting. So Nichiren, yeah, he had to speak up. He had to say, no. You guys aren't practicing Buddhism. And because you're labeling what you're doing Buddhism, you are in an affront to Shakyamuni himself, to Buddha-ness itself. You are tainting, you are poisoning the waters of the people with this horrible, divergent, really not everything but Buddhist, and you're calling it Buddhism. No, I won't have it. So he went off to meditate about how the hell am I going to proceed? How am I going to make the case for Shakyamuni in the Lotus Sutra and throughout all his teachings? Not just to point out the errors of these other schools, which he did plenty, but to show them, guide people, the bad teachers as well as the populace, and certainly the leaders, and make it obvious what Shakyamuni was teaching and what we should be emulating in the practice of Buddhism. And as he took on that whole mantle of, I'm the only one who seems to be around to do this, he began by invoking his own profound dedication, right? His determination, his conviction in the essential teaching of Shakyamuni Buddha, which was the Lotus Sutra, the MyoHoRenGeKyo. Within this MyoHoRenGeKyo teaching is the very core of what all Buddhism is about. So if we simply dedicate ourselves and determine and resolve ourselves to Buddhahood by instantiating the teachings of the MyoHoRenGeKyo, well, that's the constant invocation that we must make to retrain our minds into this teaching. And so there it is, the simplest, most direct form of practicing Buddhism. Invoke the culminating teaching itself, because in that is our method of awakening. And if we, in our samsaric life, need at times to bolster that confidence, all we need do is do the same thing Nichiren did. Study the text. Every sentence will remind you. Every sutra will guide you. And so he set about being that very example of how to practice Shakyamuni's self-enlightenment teaching, Dharma. And so he announced it in the morning. You heard the dramatic story of him stepping out, looking over the Pacific Ocean and calling out to the universe, I am dedicated and determined to follow this teaching alone and awaken Buddha. Buddha in my mind. And with that, he heads back into town. So here we go. The expelled prophet now went on missionary journeys in the neighboring provinces and finally settled down in Kamakura. He settled down in Kamakura. He worked his way back to Kamakura, teaching people as he went, flexing and working out how he was going to do this mission he'd dedicated his life to, right? And he ends up back in the very seat of government where was exiled from, right? He was run out of town. While he was studying further in the practice and social conditions of the time and the competing schools of thought, there were rumors of plots against the Hojos, the ruling clan, yeah? And family strife arose among them. They started going at each other. In addition to these things, storms, inundations, earthquakes, famines, comets followed one another in swift succession. I mean, the whole world was in upheaval. The people were panic-stricken, as you would expect, and the government could only resort to the offerings at Shinto sanctuaries and to the Buddhist rites of the Shingon mysteries, right? Not really Buddhism, but accepted as Buddhism in the day. Remember, we did a lot of reading about that, these inventions of muddying the Lotus Sutra, the culminating teaching itself, and turning it into finger gestures and incantations of all sorts, mudras and madras, right? Mantras, I mean. Nichiren himself describes the conditions as follows. So this is a little piece of what would later become the Rishoan Kokuran. Quote, we have seen many signs in heaven and earth. A famine, a plague, the whole country is filled with misery. Horses and cows are dying on the roadsides, and so are men. And there is no one to bury them. 1/2 of the population is stricken, and there is no house that has entirely escaped. It's a pretty nasty situation in Japan, yeah? Hence, many minds are turning to religious practices, yeah? Others, again, in accordance with the doctrines of secret Shingon, use copious sprinkling of holy waters from the 5 vases. Oh man, they're into rituals. And it's not Buddhism, but that's all the people know because it's promoted by these very popular, connected leaders, yeah? Some write the names of the 7 gods of luck on pieces of paper and affix them to the hundreds of doorposts to protect their homes, right? Mysticism galore. Whilst others do the same with pictures of the 5 great powerful and various Shinto gods of heaven and earth. But let men do what they will, the famine and the plague still rage. There are beggars on every hand, and the unburied corpses line the roads. Oof, you can only imagine. Out of pity, the author continues, not only for the people stricken by these calamities, but on account of the superstitious practices in which they took refuge, Nichiren pondered in his mind the question, what are the causes of these evils, and how can they be averted? So Nichiren didn't escape witnessing samsaric suffering. He saw it very viscerally around him. Even though he was a scholar of the Lotus Sutra and Buddhist teachings in general, it still impressed upon him the toll of human suffering. And how can this be connected to, I know this powerful teaching, NaMu MyoHoRenGeKyo, is so amazing, so mind-altering. How could it fail to impact on this situation? Mind-body, right? They're not disassociated. They're very much symbiotic. So this is the body in peril. In attacking the problem, Nichiren's thought naturally turned to the unique authority of the Lotus. In contrast to the syncretistic practices of the prevailing Buddhism, yet he was not satisfied until he had made a further investigation of the sacred texts and found various prophecies concerning calamities which would befall the people who degraded the true Buddhist practice by resorting to superstitions. He found it in Shakyamuni's writings. It was right there. That if your mind isn't right, if you're buried into the sand of attachments and manipulation and greed and really stupidity, foolishness, then you might expect that there'll be starvation, the crops will die, the earth will shake in 7, right? We've read that in previous sutras, and it's also in the Lotus. And Nietzsche thought, well, there it is. Shakyamuni answered this question. So he retired from his missionary work in Kamakura for this investigation to a monastery furnished with a good library, more scholarship. Let me connect the dots here. Let me really understand how this, because he's committed to the Lotus Sutra. He knows it's the ultimate teaching, but now he needs to make it practical. He needs to inspire the people of his country, his environs, to understand that with every invocation of MyoHoRenGeKyo, of instantiating our Buddha nature, that it has a real connectedness, a real result, a real relationship with the quality of our lives and the support for the quality of our lives. I can't just say it. I have to bolster it with scholarship. This is Nichiren. There he wrote and rewrote his ideas which finally took shape in an essay entitled The Risho and Kokuran, which means, and this author, of course, is going to use Western words he's familiar with. He's not far off the mark, but I'm going to correct one word I think is very disturbing. He retitles it in English, The Establishment of Righteousness and the Security of the Country. We know, because we've read it in the Gosho and we've read it in the Risho and Kokuran from different authors and different groups of scholarship, they don't use the word righteousness. But, you know, in early 1900s, late 1800s, again, we have a very strong rhetoric inculcated into the cultures that use these kinds of words that today don't have the meaning they did then. So rather than righteousness, as we've rightly seen in other translations, it's the establishment of the correct practice, the correct Buddhist practice for securing peace in the land or the country, right? There's various, but they all center around the righteousness that this author is talking about isn't indignant or superior thinking. It's the practice of Buddhism, the correct practice of Buddhism. That is what is the right way to proceed. In this essay, Nichiren fearlessly pointed out the degeneracy of the people and the foolishness of the rulers. Because the elite, the rulers, they're like the parents of the country. They're supposed to be guiding the citizenship, and rather than guiding them, they're polluting them. The heaviest responsibility for the miseries of the time he ascribed to Amida Buddhism, Nembutsu, the chanting of Amida Buddha. Of course, to call it Buddhism is an insult to Buddha, to Buddhism, to Buddha-ness. The idea that you should spend your life atoning for something, dreaming of another place after you die where things will be great. It'll be a party after I'm dead. What? Hello? Anyone in there? How nonsense, childish foolishness is that? It's worse than foolishness. It's utter stupidity. Today we call it, was it adamant ignorance, or what's the common phrase? Anyway, to be stubbornly stupid. All right? So Nichiren identifies that because it's the biggest practice going on. It's the simplest thing to absolve yourself of responsibility and say, everything will be okay after I die. Well, yeah, because you won't be here. Makes sense, right? By which both the government and the people were led astray from the, again, righteousness, from the correct practice of Buddhism. Moreover, he gave a prophetic warning to the nation that if it did not turn at once to the unique truth, the correct practice of Buddhism, the country would experience more disasters, calamities, especially a foreign invasion. Because it's Shakyamuni already predicted. This is the behavior, this is the consequence of bad behavior. And rebellion, which was already happening within the ruling class. His vehement expression runs as follows, quote, "Of all the misfortunes, but one remains that we have not yet experienced, the misfortune of foreign invasion." And boy, the way we're headed, it's nobody could look at Japan right now and the disarray and foolishness going on and not think, we could take over that place. Look at those stupid people. Right? I mean, logically it makes sense. Rationally it makes sense. And it's talked about in the sutra. So Nichiren goes, this is going to happen, folks, unless you change your mind. You start behaving differently with a correct practice of Buddhism rather than this political nonsense we're all inundated in. When I consider these scriptural prophecies and then look at the world around me, Nichiren writes, I am bound to confess that both the gods and the minds of the people are confused. You see the fulfillment of the prophecy in the past. Dare we say that the remaining prophecies will fail of their fulfillment? So he's showing people, look, this is what you claim to be studying. The sutras tell you why this is happening. The only thing that hasn't happened yet is foreign invasion. How can it fail to happen? Look at the past. Look at your immediate past. All of these discussions, these prophecies, are they prophecies, or are they really just a mathematical equation? You do this, you're bound to create a situation where this happens. Is that really a prophecy, or is that just a clear-eyed vision, understanding of the nature of life? If you promote fire, then fire will consume what it burns. Right? So I'm not sure I like the word prophecies, but it's used all the time, right? Again, a westernization. This warning, the author goes on, was followed by an admonition to the nation to be converted to Nichiren's doctrine. In other words, look at the case I'm making. It's rational. It's reasonable. How can you not? But go ahead, try to poke a hole in it. My argument, my doctrine, is backed up by the sutras themselves. If you read them. Based on the sermon of the Lotus. So on the merit of the Lotus alone, Nichiren stood firm. Said, if you get this, then everything else falls into place. The vehement prophet would not be satisfied unless all other forms of Buddhism were suppressed and their leaders severely punished. Thus he concludes, quote, woe unto them! They have missed the entrance into the gate that leads to the true Buddhist practice, and they have fallen into the prison house of false teachings. They are fettered, entangled, bewildered, right? We talked about entanglement, attachment, earthly prize. Whither will their blind wanderings lead them? Ye men of little resolve. Again, the westernization of this translation is stark. Turn your minds and trust yourselves at once to the unique truth of the Lotus Sutra. Then you will see that the three realms of existence are in reality the kingdom of Buddha, which is in no way subject to decay, and that the worlds in the 10 directions are all the lands of treasures which are never to be destroyed. The kingdom is changeless and the lands eternal. The lands, as you'll recall from the Vimalakirti, is our experience, our sentient mind's perception of the functionings of life. And the kingdom is changeless is about the Buddha-ness, the Buddha nature, the Buddha mind. Once you get it, everything is glorious. And then you're not attached to everything that's creating all this misery. Then how shall your bodies be otherwise than secure and your minds serene in enlightenment? End quote. Author continues, not only were these words preached to the masses on the streets and in the parks, but written down in a document presented to the government authorities in the 7th month of 1260. The government was shocked. This annoying little fart still around? He's making us look bad. I thought we got rid of him. The ecclesiastic dignitaries were enraged. How dare he impugn us as not understanding Buddhism, right? He was pissing everybody off. Well, the leaders anyway. He was helping the populace realize, oh, wow, we've been bamboozled by crooks and right, false self-proclaimed experts. They've been lying to us. And Nichiren could show you proof in Shakyamuni's words thousands of years earlier. So what have these bozos been teaching us? Man, our government, well, you could say he was sowing more unrest. But at least this unrest, in Nichiren's mind anyway, and in point of fact, was healthy. It was trying to oust all of this diseased thinking. But the diseased thinking was very profitable for the elite. Even though they were in total disarray, they still clung to their wealth and power. And Nichiren was a big pain in the butt. And instigation from behind the scenes stirred up a mob, and that mob attacked Nichiren's hermitage and burnt it down. They found where he lives, and I'm sure there were a lot of people in the country who were drugged by the same Kool-Aid that those leaders and elites were drinking, right? Nichiren didn't just walk down the streets and everyone was converted. Some were, but some, like the government or like the leading elites, saw him as a troublemaker. So it wasn't hard to stir up some sentiment and have a lynch mob go over there and burn his house down. Nichiren escaped the peril through the darkness of night again, and fleeing out of Kamakura, went on a missionary journey in adjacent provinces. So now he's basically homeless, and he's getting the hell out of Kamakura again. And as he's going, not knowing everywhere he goes, he looks for opportunities to educate people, to open their minds, and thereby getting a place to stay for the night, being fed as a monk, traveling. Yeah. There more converts were made, undoubtedly, and among them not a few of the warrior class. So even invited into samurai homes. And samurai's thinking, yeah, I haven't liked what's going on for a long time. You make a lot of sense, Nichiren. I will adopt your doctrine and the true teachings of Shakyamuni, the Lotus Sutra, as my mission, my spiritual mission, along with being a samurai, right? A murderer. What a conundrum that must have been. The local chiefs, who were not under the direct control of the dictator, were also, many of them, converted. The suspicion in which the government held Nichiren increased. He's making headway. He's turning people's minds against us. Damn him. And when he came back to Kamakura in the following year, he's a glutton for punishment. But you have to understand, at this time, Nichiren really believed that with the thousands and thousands of people, citizens of Japan, going door to door was going to take a really long time to get everyone enlightened, right, on the right path. It's much easier to convince the leaders, because if he could convince the leaders, then the whole country instantly would be exposed to correct practice. And, there's always going to be resistance, but a much more efficacious way of, quote unquote, saving the nation, right? So he was officially arrested the moment they saw him. He's back here? Arrest him, right? And finally sentenced to banishment and sent to the desolate shore of the peninsula Izu. in the 5th month of 1261. So that is his first banishment. Get him the banishment from Japan. I mean, the peninsula, Izu Peninsula, was part of Japan, but it was a very remote and uninhabitable, dangerous place, basically sent to die. We can't seem to kill this kid, so let's just send him somewhere and let him starve to death. In this place of exile, Nichiren found bear shelter with a fisherman and his wife in the midst of threatening dangers. And there were plenty of people who were living there that knew of, right, the government's hatred of Nichiren. So his life was in constant peril. How deeply he felt his obligations to these simple and adamant converts, it is shown in the letters written to them later, wherein they are likened to Nichiren's parents, perhaps in a former life. His hardest trials did not last long. More converts were made, and Nichiren's message found a sincere response in the unprejudiced hearts of the country folk. What a story, huh? Yet he was in exile, but at least he found in the simple folks removed from the direct influence of Kamakura logic. People really appreciated the insights. They saw the truth in it, right? So yeah, he converted lots of people. He had been repeatedly attacked and had some narrow escapes from death. His future showed no bright prospects, and his hope of converting the nation as a whole seemed to be very remote, if not totally vain. It's like, but you know, he's not just doing it for himself. He is changing minds and getting supporters. It's just Japan as a whole is in such dire straits, yeah? So he felt more, his mission was more of a parenthood of his entire culture. Yes, he appreciated, those he was able to teach and who converted to Lotus Sutra Buddhism. That was very rewarding and very validating. But in his mind, it was too small of a beginning. He needed to change the directions of his entire culture. His thought turned to the question whether his mission would be fulfilled. And he re-examined the scripture with reference to this problem. Maybe there's an answer in here that speaks directly to what I'm struggling with. Nearly 10 years had passed since Nichiren had proclaimed his new doctrine, and these years had been full of adventures and dangers. The threats and perils heaped upon him, as well as the disasters which filled the people with terror, seemed to him not mere chance, but the necessary consequence of the conflict between the blindness of the people and the compassionate cure proposed by the Lotus Sutra. All this, the causes and effects, the present calamities and the future destiny, gave him new assurance that every prophecy in this teaching would certainly be fulfilled. Everything in the Lotus Sutra that it talks about, from not doing things right to doing things correctly, practicing correctly for one's emancipation, I mean, it's all laid out. Of course it's going to happen. That's the path Japan is on. The thing which most strongly confirmed his resolve in the scripture and his enthusiasm for it was the discovery that every phrase of the vows of perseverance, as set forth in the chapter on perseverance, had been and was being realized step by step in his own life. Sometimes that chapter is called peaceful practice. It's got different names, but it really outlines how an individual should practice Buddhism throughout their life. The ardent spirit of the vows found its closest counterpart and echo in his fiery personality and perilous career. This so suits me, Nichiren thinks. I'm so incensed by the ignorance and motivated to correct it. I mean, it's like the sutras talking to me directly. That's exactly the method of propagation and conviction, more than anything, that this teaching relies upon. Read, recite, copy, spread. It's repeated over and over again in the Lotus Sutra, yeah? See what the scripture tells us? Buddha's disciples beholding the amazing vision of the treasure tower and hearing the encouraging exhortation, take together the vows of fidelity and endurance. Quote, O exalted one, be little anxious for us. After the great decease, in the evil ages full of fears and dangers, we shall proclaim the supreme teaching, the one vehicle, the MyoHoRenGeKyo. Yeah? This is what Nichiren had done, and he was now suffering for it. Quote, there will then surely be malignant men, and they will deride us and abuse us, lay upon us with weapons and sticks. All these things we shall bear with endurance and perseverance. This is from the Lotus Sutra, right? Does this not mean, Nichiren thought, the laymen, the rulers, and the people who antagonize the truth because of their dislike for the correct practice, did they not threaten him with swords and fire? Again, in the Lotus, in the latter days there will be monks who, being malicious and crooked in mind, will pretend to have attained what is not really attained, and their minds will be full of vain pride. There's Honen, there's the other teachers of the Nembutsu and the Zen and the Shingon and Shinto and all of them. They're all just arrogant politicians. They're not teaching Buddhism. More page-turning karma. Were not the monks always the instigators of the persecutions after Nichiren? Traitors to Buddha, companions of devils, worshippers of strange deities, men of vain pride. These are Nichiren's bitter enemies. Is not the prophecy being fulfilled by them? The teaching. Prophecy. It's just an equation, yeah? Do this, get that. Further, and we'll end with this part. There's a lot more quoting from the Lotus here. There will be those who dwell in forests, living in tranquility and wearing the regular robes. They pretend to practice the true monastic life and despise all other men. They will preach to laymen simply for the sake of fame and profit. Man, he's identifying all those bozos around him, isn't he? And there it is in the Lotus Sutra, thousands of years old. And yet they will be revered by the people as if they were endowed with the 6 supernormal powers. So the author here says, are not all abbots and bishops men of this kind in his day? Observe how some of them pretend to be arhants, fully enlightened ones, and are believed by the people. With that, we'll take a break here, and then there's a lengthy quote from the Lotus Sutra, and that's how we'll start our next video. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for participating in this practice. Thank you. Again, that is the root cause or mission that I have taken on for my life, is to work one-on-one with you guys to explore these insights of Nichiren, of Buddhism, of the Lotus Sutra, as best I can in some way to help you, to help all of us, myself included, gain stronger insights, more intimate resolve on what it is to enlighten our minds for the maximal fulfillment of life, our lives, the lives of those around us. What good is it to be enlightened all alone and everyone around us in misery? That's why we're the bodhisattvas of the future, right? So, in that regard, thank you. Thank you for your hard work, for your resolve and your practice. Keep it strong. Take care of your health. Be kind to yourself. And I'll see you in the next one. NaMu MyoHoRenGeKyo. Bye for now. Myo